Welcome to the World We Got This podcast, brought to you by King's College London. In this series, we take a look at the complex issues of the world today. We ask those researching and studying these fields about the challenges we face and what society needs to do to help solve them.
This is an In Conversation episode with PhD student Dr. Vignesh Rajahmani and Professor Christophe Jaffrelot, Professor of Indian Politics and Sociology at the King's India Institute. Vignesh's research investigates how the Dravidian movement in Tamil Nadu in southern India evolved from being a grassroots social movement that challenged caste hierarchy into a viable political party that has had a lasting impact on the political ethos and identity of Tamil Nadu. The strong regional emphasis of the movement has also impacted national politics and federalism in India. Studying the Dravidian movement offers unique insights into the potential of identity politics to achieve social justice. Now, on to the conversation.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the World We Got This podcast. I'm Christophe Jaffrelot, Professor of Political Science at King's in this capacity, but also as a research lead for the Global Institutes. Today we are talking to Vignesh Rajahmani, who has just completed his PhD under my co-supervision from the King's India Institute. And we'll first, of course, ask Vignesh, who is, by the way, celebrating a job offer today, to introduce himself, and he will tell you more about him and, of course, the topic.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thanks very much for the opportunity. And yes, I did get a job offer today in the morning. My name is Vignesh, and I just finished my PhD at King's College London, working with you, Professor Jaffrelot, and then Dr. Kriti Kapila on how social movements transform to party politics in India. And the case study that I look at is the Dravidian movement, which is in the south of India, and then the transformation of the Dravidian movement to electorally viable party politics by understanding the trajectory of the DMK. And other than that, I have been a policy and a political consultant in India for almost 5 years now, before starting the PhD and during my PhD as well. And I am largely interested in discourse, resource, and personnel as pivots of elections in India, and how social movements can lead to a politics of social justice, recognition, and redistribution.
Oh, we will return to all these entry points in your research for sure. Let me cite the title of your PhD, because it's a rather explicit title: The Dravidian Pathway, Dravidam Kazagam, and the Transition of a Socio-Cultural Movement into Party Politics between Periyar E.V. Ramaswamy and C.N. Annadurai. DMK is clearly the heart of the matter here. What led you to pursue a PhD in the first place, and a PhD on such a topic, Vignesh?
The short answer to this is your book, India Silent Revolution. But if I was to expand a little bit, my training was in business studies in undergraduation, and I was in Loyola College, which in itself was a very political space, but it was all in the undertone. And I also joined my college just in the aftermath of the Sri Lankan Civil War. And the college was abuzz with what needs to be done for the Sri Lankan Tamils that were stuck there in 2009 in the aftermath of the war. I think I was good at business studies that I studied because I landed a job in Goldman Sachs. But then the politics aspect of it led me to pursue, something else. And I wanted to do social sciences and humanities. And the course then that I picked was at King's College London and at the King's India Institute as well, which is the MA in Modern India, where I met you first, and Professor Kilnani, Professor Tillin, Dr. Kapila, and the late Ian Jack as well. I attended as many classes as possible. And I also got to sort of, work with the Ministry of Social Justice at the capacity of being an intern. I've always seen Tamil Nadu from a comparative perspective, because I have not lived in the state much. So all of these learnings, plus my master's dissertation, which was on the transition or the political change in Uttar Pradesh in the 1990s, which stems more directly from your book, India Silent Revolution. I then wanted to unpack what made Tamil Nadu a lot more resilient in terms of political change and, the assertion of the marginalized. compared to, let's say, in Uttar Pradesh. The learnings, in a certain sense, are also on the lines of the discourse in Tamil Nadu by a considerable section of its elites and the middle class, and their antipathy or apathy towards the politics and political parties in the state, which is an important case in point for me. And by elites, I mean anyone who exhibit hegemonic tendencies irrespective of their gender, class, or caste location. On learning over the years, one idea was that mere perception of the hegemonic elite can trump the empirical and lived realities of the marginalized. And therefore, I thought, let's understand the case of Tamil Nadu, because it's not a state that's really appreciated, or it's not a political change that is appreciated by its elite.
The comparison or the comparative approach is clearly a great motivation, and we can understand your frustration. It was all about the Gujarat model. It was all about how the North is dominating Indian politics and showing the way to explore the Dravidian trajectory, or what is known also as the Dravidian model, to paraphrase the title of a recent famous book. Vignesh, for those who are not familiar with Indian politics, who are really non-initiated, how would you define the Dravidian movement, and how would you contextualize it at the Indian level?
Thank you, Professor. So, Dravidian movement is a comprehensive phrase given to a host of anti-elite movements in Tamil Nadu and in Madras Presidency in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So it at least is marked by 4 or 5 strands, as we can look at today. But to put together, it is essentially a movement that is marked by, and I'm borrowing from Nancy Fraser's famous triad, which is marked by recognition of particularistic grievances of marginalized communities, redistribution of resources, and representation in power. So it is essentially a movement that is marked by social justice and also cultural distinctiveness put together. But what distinguishes it from an otherwise revivalist movement, as people may perceive it to be, is the way in which it is interested in the present and the future. And the past is only a pivot to sort of, move or be interested in the present and the future.
Yes, and you emphasize the social dimension, and rightly so. Of course, it is an ethno-social movement because Dravidian languages are the languages of South India. They form a family: Tamil, Malayalam, Telugu, Kannada, in opposition to the languages of the North and the West, which are, of course, deriving from Sanskrit. But what is so interesting, and that's what you show in your PhD, is that on the basis of a linguistic identity, because of a social composition and social dynamic, the ideologues have been in a position to create a new repertoire and to ethnicize caste to some extent and make caste such a powerful vehicle for social change using culture, language as a cementing force. This is key in your demonstration, and those who will read it will enjoy it also for that reason. Now, of course, you need to tell those who have not read your PhD in a nutshell. What have you discovered? What have you shown?
So, if I was to sort of, broadly put it, one major or central argument or the finding of the thesis is that a sufficiently capacious political identity, which is purposively accommodative of the aspirations of multiple marginalized communities, and which is conceived by a subaltern political class through conscious political action, can result in recognition of particularistic grievances, redistribution of resources, and representation in power for those marginalized communities. And it need not always be discussed under the tropes of identity politics as if they are bad. And such a process of democratization serves as a bulwark against the onslaught of hegemonic forces in the socio-cultural, economic, or even the political realms. And that also explains the reason why Tamil Nadu people vote the way they vote today. And in terms of chapterization, the way I go about it is again informed by my theoretical framework, which again I draw from your work, which is an integrated theory in ethnic nationalism, which breaks away from the rather infamous trope of ethnic nationalism being exclusive and limited, as against the ability for the realm of ethnic nationalism to provide an empowering space. So the first chapter starts with how an identity is constructed through an ideology driven identity that is constructed by the political class and also informed by the people, and how they change it, how they make it a lot more agile. And then it moves to the dissemination aspect of it. And I discuss this through the vantage point of reading rooms, which is also a new contribution. So far, the Dravidian movement has been studied in the vantage point of movies or pop culture references, which is also very important. But I look at it from the perspective of how the people of Madras or the Tamil people were actually a reading public as against a viewing public. And I tie those loose ends, which are the breaks in the literature. So once I look at this dissemination, I then talk about how a repertoire is constructed, the Dravidian Tamil repertoire, and how the developments in India and in Madras state, starting from the independence and then the first amendment that they bring in, and then the reorganization of states, 1856, and then the Chinese War of 1962, the anti-secession bill of 19, which followed the Chinese War, and then the anti-Hindi agitations of 1965. And then the victory of the DMK. So how all of these instances are rendered within the repertoire of the Dravidian Tamil ethos. So how an issue is perceived and then rendered in one's own vocabulary and repertoire, which then leads to a very consolidated sort of victory in 1967 and the defeat of a stalwart of the Congress party, which is K. Kamaraj, who also helped the furthering of Dravidian movement. But even he had to be defeated at some point, not as an idea, but as an electoral candidate. So the movement then goes back to sort of, conserve him as an idea. And this is how I present it. But at the same time, this does not just stop with a great story of the movement transitioning into party politics, but also what they missed. For instance, women representation has been abysmally low and continues to be the case. And what has been a reading public is not now a reading public anymore. Tamil Nadu is also, susceptible to misinformation campaigns and also a lot of propaganda recently. So I also try and address these things in the epilogue section of the thesis.
Great. We see that you stop in 1967, which is somewhat challenging, which is also not so common for political science PhDs, which most of the time deal with contemporary issues. This is, of course, necessarily with implications in terms of methods. It's historical, it's something that makes participatory observation, of course, more difficult, even impossible. So how have you operated? And of course, the subtext there is, on the one hand, you can rely on ethnographic techniques, interviewing those who can remember what happened in the past, but you have to check whether they remember correctly. On the other hand, you have aggregated data, you have electoral results, but you can also build your own data set. So the quantitative dimension and the qualitative dimension, how have they been combined in your PhD? And do you believe in mixed methods at the end of the day?
Again, the short answer is yes. And this also comes from Dr. Kriti Kapila, who's also a co-supervisor, who's a very a big proponent and a supporter of mixed methods approach. And I'd like to quote you again in an interview with Ed Anderson, where you speak about the importance of studying India in itself in a mixed methods framework, and the importance to sort of look at least the simultaneous processes, to say the least, to understand the complex outcomes that India produces or even regions within India produce. So on that note, I do deploy a considerably full range of mixed methods, from qualitative to quantitative, ethnographic to building a data set. So it starts with archival study, writing in speeches of Periyar and Annadurai, and also Madras State Legislative Assembly and Rajya Sabha debates. And there are also selected works of Nehru that I reach out to because of the role of Rajaji in Tamil Nadu or in Madras State, and also Kamaraj. And also the who's who documents of the State Assembly, which is actually a treasure trove of information. And then I also move on to unstructured and semi-structured interviews with senior politicians of the major political parties at the time, which is like DMK, Congress, Swatantra Party, Communist Party, and also the allied organizations of respective parties. There have also been a few journalists that I spoke to, sub-regional chroniclers, they call themselves historians, a few of them who actually have degrees in history, who are also historians. In fact, almost 60 of them, and I've only mentioned 20 to 25 of them. And the reason for that is, which you just mentioned, which is They have told me a whole lot of things, but I could not find corroborative evidence in the archives. So therefore, the 60 interviews actually looks like 25 interviews in my thesis. And yes, participant observation was very key because I did go to the reading rooms that have existed since 1900s, run by the Congress, run by the DMK, run by Justice Party, and even the DK, or even caste associations for that matter. India's elite now would like to imagine caste associations as a space that is worth scorning. I think caste associations in Tamil Nadu had actually helped democratization and also empowerment in a certain sense, or also the spread of education. And these reading rooms are continue to be the testament of it. For instance, a guy in or an 80-year-old, today's 80-year-old in Virudhunagar district, where I did my thesis as field work, actually read about Marx, Plato, and even Mazzini from those libraries run by caste associations, and even the knowledge of English. Communist parties, the CPI, CPM's newspapers still come to those reading rooms where people continue to read them. Then I move on to election results data, which is a core element of how I back my findings, which is to see a correlation. Though I don't speak about causation a lot in my thesis because of my disciplinarian investment. And I also built two data sets. One is the caste profiles of winners of the state legislative assembly elections between 1951 and 67. And by this, I mean Jati level. And this is essentially almost 4 elections. I don't look at by-elections, but 4 elections, 200 people each, almost 1,000 people whose caste data that we have. And uniquely, there would be somewhere around 600 to 700 people. So who are these people? What kind of change had been effectuated? And also, I draw an estimate of the number of reading rooms that existed in Tamil Nadu or in Madras state between 1957 and 67. But this I don't explicitly mention in my thesis because this is drawn from the work of Margaret Ross Barnett before, which was then juxtaposed with the regional chroniclers and also the DMK party historians. So this finds a place in the appendix section of my thesis. But I definitely talk about the density because it's a function of percentages and they continue to exist in the major section of my thesis. This, in fact, helps me contribute in a certain sense, which is to actually talk about what caste politics means in Tamil Nadu. How is it different from, let's say, an Andhra Pradesh or even an Uttar Pradesh? And a case in point is in my work with real verniers, which we published in Scroll, a part of Trivedi Center for Political Data, which you're also a part of. We talk about how Tamil Nadu continues to have almost 30 to 34 caste groups that are represented, the most diverse in legislature in India. So how did this come about? And how women were left behind, both qualitatively and quantitatively. And also the case of Dalits, how they are quantitatively present but qualitatively absent in cabinets. So yes, there are a bunch of findings there.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you continued this research and that will be published very soon. You have co-authored a book chapter with Andrew Wyatt showing what has been the social background of the MLAs in Tamil Nadu, not only under the years you cover in your PhD, but till today. And that's indeed fitting in a work and in a book that we will co-edit with Gilles Verniers, whom we have just mentioned now. Well, this journey, Vignesh, this intellectual journey has not been always easy. We know it's tough. And we know that PhD students have ups and downs, that sometimes it's challenging. What kind of challenges, hardships of fieldwork, or not only fieldwork, but the drafting, the writing part, what was the most difficult?
So, Professor, in fact, picking this topic in itself and to find someone who would mentor me throughout was in itself a question. So, who would do that? And therefore, I sort of draw recall the years 2016, 17, and 18, where I was incessantly writing emails to Dr. Kapila and you. Saying that, oh, I'm interested in this. How do we go about this? And it also led to a workshop that you had organized in Ashoka University to sort of understand or learn, data analysis and R and QGIS and all of these things. So right from the know-how and the work that I have done now is, and this is in no way, me trying to sort of sell myself over, but it is in a certain sense unique for Tamil Nadu, the kind of treatment that the thesis puts Tamil Nadu through. So to bring out empirical evidence, to reach people and ask the questions that they are not used to answering. For instance, one question that I asked someone was, why did Kamaraj lose? It's a very simple question. But for a state that is not used to remembering that past of, how he lost to a student leader of the DMK, but also to embrace the fact that he is conserved as an idea today. That was one aspect which is a part of the ideation and conceptualization of the thesis. And do I actually need to tread this path? This is one. And the way I'm positioning myself in the literature, there is also, the conceptualization of Adda as an associational space by Professor Dipesh Chakravarti. Now, to pick on Dipesh Chakravarti's own concerns about Adda, which is of domination and exclusion, and then to look at reading rooms and to marshal, the theories put forth by Chris Bailey or even, Sandria Freitag in terms of, associational activity, and then to present the case of Tamil Nadu was an interesting story. This is not necessarily a social movement like the case of the Brazilian Workers' Party. It is a little beyond that, and therefore a theoretical framework in itself. So this is how the thinking beyond just putting together the research idea was a little tricky. And then the writing in itself took me time, and I revisited it multiple times. You also looked at it at least 4 or 5 times in this process. The full draft, I mean, the chapters are another question altogether. But with respect to practicalities, COVID was a big blow to the way in which I tried to sort of imagine my fieldwork. I thought it would be done in 3 years, all of it. But then that one extra year, COVID cost it. And finding funds to do the fieldwork is also one question, which is a case in point. The other aspect, which was also tricky, was to do this at a time when Tamil Nadu was going through 2021 elections. So you don't get appointments that easily, you need to. But this was in itself a learning for me, which is to say that how politicians, political class are also interested in supporting such research, but are also constrained by their own predicaments. Lastly, one other struggle that I can think of is how then to sort of present Tamil Nadu in the context that is relevant for someone who's not interested in Tamil Nadu or for India for that matter. So that kind of an understanding came to me very late when I co-taught a course with Dr. Subir Sinha in School of Oriental African Studies, SOAS, called Partnerships Beyond Borders. It was about global, social movements. And then to understand what happened in Brazil, what happened in Cambodia, what happened in Cuba, and all of that, and then to put together, the thesis in a way that it is digestible was another interesting challenge. A lot of people have spoken about this. I only have the experience of it. It is a lonely journey, yes, but I have sufficiently kept myself occupied, and it is possible. For one such way was to write op-eds, and to co-author with a lot of people. And in one such feedback form, you'd written that I think you need to stop writing op-eds now, Vignesh, and start writing your thesis. But that kept me going. So that kind of writing op-eds, talking to people. I, in fact, got a gig with the DMK, a consulting gig with the DMK during the elections to share my findings, preliminary findings with them. So that kept me going. So my research journey was not necessarily lonely. The thesis journey also put me on a path of resilience training in a certain sense. I did not have money for the last year fees, and I went on a crowdfunding marathon. And I got to see how the community comes together and who funds who and how are people funded and a lot of that. And in that way, making my project actually truly public. So I don't owe it to my savings fully or my parents' earnings fully, but it is also partially funded by the public themselves, which in itself changed me in a certain sense.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this material dimension because you're not the only one. So many Indian students are struggling these days, scholarships being too few, and I'm glad you raised that. Yeah, nothing can replace a PhD, the making of a PhD, as an initiation into what is research. But as you said, it's a rather long journey, 3-4 years. In the course of these 3-4 years, have you changed your mind? Have you changed your hypothesis? Have you changed your research question? And if so, to what extent, why, and how could you find a new sense of direction?
Thank you, Professor, for that question. And in fact, in short, my understanding about and the opinion of political opportunism changed. And the way I had understood the change in Tamil Nadu before I started my fieldwork and this long fieldwork, the criticism is that the DMK wanted Dravidian Nadu. The DMK said it would eradicate caste. Have they? The DMK wanted Dravidian Nadu. Did they secure it? The DMK says anti-Hindi agitations, but the schools that are run in Tamil Nadu and even a few run by the party people teach Hindi. So what about that? And the DMK says they are atheist, but there are a lot of temples in Tamil Nadu. It's an extremely religious state. And therefore, my perception of this process was that, oh, maybe it is marked by a lot of compromise. So the way I had perceived one chapter in itself, chapter 3, which is the transition through events or developments. So I thought, and I had agreed with Margaret Ross Barnett to a large extent that the DMK had watered itself down. But my fieldwork actually revealed that this was seen as a foot in the door, and then as the first step towards creating change. So the reformation or the repurposing of the DK and the breakaway as the DMK as a political party. So this Justice Party was an election fighting machine. Periyar said it should become a social organization, and Anna said, no, we have to fight elections again. And he said, I am okay with the Independence Day. Periyar said Independence Day is a bad day. And then Periyar said, no God's good enough. But Annadurai said that there's only one community and one God. So Ondre Kulam Orune Devan. So that sort of informed my notion of political opportunism. And today, as we see, the changes are visible. 50 years later, you do not have religious riots in Tamil Nadu. In fact, Professor Narendra Subramanian talks about this a lot in his work in terms of how conflicts are less. But this also does not yield or play into electoral outcomes. For instance, the case of the weak position of the BJP in Tamil Nadu, for example, and the same wave of majoritarian wave twice, 2014 and 19, did not hold any ground in Tamil Nadu. The party lost 38-2, if we were to consider Pondicherry as well. And in this case, it is 39-1. And there is no single BJP MP candidate from Tamil Nadu. We have studied the communist movement in Kerala and then their opposition. But to see this in a cultural context, I think that made me look at it a little differently. And also, the usual trope is that Kamraj was the nicest man ever. And then the person who defeated him was supposed to be the worst person ever. And then the criticism by the middle class elite is that, oh, this is the state that even defeated a leader like Kamraj. But when you unpack it, the leader that opposed Kamraj was also a student leader who went to jail in the Defense of India rules at the time, which is almost like emergency rules. He also spoke about repealing the 17th Amendment of Indian Constitution to his constituents. The 17th Amendment was that the Rayatwari lands also can be taken up by the government. So there is this kind of a redistributional politics and within the communities there. And people came together, they voted. It was almost 2,000 students across the state that were working actively, and almost 300-400 students that were working in Virudhunagar for the DMK, which is a fascinating finding.
Well, the last question, Vignesh, of course, is, after the PhD, what? There is a life after a PhD, but it's a different life, for sure. How do you intend now to take your research forward? You have a postdoc position, does not necessarily helps you to continue with the same topic because you may have to adjust to a new research agenda, but we always expect from a student to publish the PhD, to turn it into a book. So what is the next step now, Vignesh, now that the PhD is over?
Yes, as you said it, academically speaking, I need to publish this into a book. So fingers crossed, I am writing the proposal at this stage and then pitch it, hopefully, in a good series with a good publisher. So that's the next step. But beyond that, as I mentioned before, I got an opportunity to consult for the DMK in the run-up to the 2021 elections when I was doing my fieldwork. So from then on, and even a little before that, I have been sharing my research findings with the party and the government now, and the government then from time to time. I've also been writing and co-writing op-eds, almost quite a few now, and I wish to keep that going because I see a lot of potential in such dissemination. The other aspect is the postdoc. Yes, I do have a position with Professor Ward Berenschot and in the Royal Netherlands Institute of Southeast Asian and Caribbean Studies, which is based in the University of Leiden, but he's also affiliated to the University of Amsterdam, so it's a multi-institution. This project looks at campaign financing, which is an extension of the way that I perceive elections, which is resource, discourse, and mobilization. So I'm looking at the resource aspect of it. And it's a comparative study between India and Indonesia. And the states that I am looking at in this project are Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, and then Maharashtra and Haryana. So Tamil Nadu is not there, which means that there is one more layer of complexity that I can add to my understanding of Tamil Nadu, to look at these 4 states and then bring in my own findings about Tamil Nadu. So it's going in 2 directions as I see it, but I hope to sort of straddle both in meaningful and creative manners.
You will for sure. You will for sure. We have no doubt about that. You're a man of many talents, Vignesh. Thank you so much for telling your story as a PhD student to all of us, to those who did not know what was behind this text that will be turned into a book for sure. We are looking forward to reading it in a book form now. Thank you again, and good luck for the next ventures you're involved in.
Thank you very much, Professor.
You've been listening to the World We Got This in Conversation episode with Dr. Vignesh Rajahmani and Professor Christophe Jaffrelot. You can learn more about Vignesh's research on the website of the King's India Institute. This episode was brought to you by the School of Global Affairs. It was produced by me, Meghna Chaukar, and edited by Rachel Wall.
You have been listening to the World We Got This podcast. To find out more about the research at King's on this and other global challenges, please visit our website, kcl.ac.uk. Please review, subscribe and share the podcast so you don't miss an episode and it's easier for others to find out about the series.